Welcome. I'm Jeff Lyons, founder of Storygeeks.com, and the instructor or teacher in this free webinar on scene building nuts and bolts. And this is a little introduction video to the video that you're going to watch, the longer video. It's like 43 minutes or something. But I wanted to do a little intro to explain the context because the longer video is going to be referring to modules and things like that, like module 3 and so on. And that's because this video is an excerpt from a class, a self-directed class that you can get on my website, storygeeks.com, called Build Your Book, which is a whole class on how to build out your book once you have your core development all done. Building out your chapters, how do you build out your scenes per chapter, and that's where we get into much more nuts and bolts on the scenes, even more than in this little quick webinar. But this one piece I pulled out because it's very valuable and very informational that will help all fiction writers and memoirists or creative nonfiction writers understand better what the dynamics and the basics are of what scenes and scene building is all about. There's a ton of stuff that comes after this nuts and bolts class that you have to learn as well. We're not going to cover, scene sequel versus my definition of scene work, because it's a very different kind of animal. Scene sequel is something you may have heard. It's a very old-fashioned term, an old writing term that a lot of people still use. It's kind of out of date, I think, but it's something that needs to be discussed at some point. How scenes work with chapters and so on and so on, for building pace and tension. Again, we can't get into all of those nuts and bolts here, but we're going to get into the basic nuts and bolts. But I want you to understand the context of this, because I'm going to throw out some terms as we get into this later on, like module this and module that, and referring to classes, blah, blah, blah. That's because this comes out of a self-directed class that you would take to build your book, to get all your chapters done, get all your scenes in the chapters done, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a piece that's been pulled out for your benefit, and it's for free and covers some really cool stuff about scenes and scene building dynamics and nuts and bolts. Okay, so sit back and just enjoy and learn. You can come back and watch this on the YouTube channel as much as you want, and learn all about scenes, well, at least a good chunk about scenes and scene building from my perspective. Not everyone agrees with how I approach this, but I find it to be very effective and very productive and very useful. So enjoy. Welcome to Module 3, Scene Nuts and Bolts. We're going to break apart scenes and scene components in this particular module. Before we get into chapters and scenes, you have to understand what a scene is and what elements and components build scenes across a chapter, or a book for that matter. So this is going to be similar to the introduction to the pacing discussion, in that this is mostly informational and giving you definitional concepts and things to learn, so that you understand when we get to the actual constructions of scenes, how they work. Okay. So this first section of this module is on story beats, on scenes, on scene sequences, and story milestones. These are all the component parts that all build together to move an entire book forward from the beginning to the end. All you're doing is building scenes and on scenes in different configurations and different combinations to accomplish specific story goals in terms of structure and in terms of narrative beats and in terms of narrative flow. It all starts with beats. Okay, you've heard this term a billion times. Save the Cat is a beat sheet, and all sorts of people have definitions of what beats are and what a story beat is. And one of the most famous ones is Robert McKee in his book Story, where he does very good definitions of basic concepts of story development. I find it all a bit pedantic, but that's how he writes, and it gets the job done. I have my own definition of all of these things, but when you look at everybody from Robert McKee to Joe Schmo, if they're tuned in, if they're connected to the real concepts and ideas and principles of these things, they're all saying the same basic thing, just in different proprietary ways, including me. Okay, so this is just my take on the same take that a dozen other people you might have heard of are taking on their end, and they're just using their own proprietary language. This is, in fact, one of the keys to understanding whether or not somebody out there in the world that you're starting to listen to and learn from actually has something to say. When you hear someone say something about this is a principle of storytelling, or this is the rule that you must follow, regardless of the language they're using to sell, lunch boxes or whatever it is, you want to look for the function. You want to look for the purpose of this definition. Not just the form of it. Well, here's what a thing is, and it's defined by this and this and this. Yeah, but what's its job in the story? What's the function? And if you can find two or more people who may be using different language, completely different language, but functionally they're all on the same page, then you're dialed in. Then you've got somebody and something that's real, because they're connected into the zeitgeist. They're a part of the archetypal forms that are out there floating around that create and form stories all the time. And they're hooked in. And they're talking about the same thing. That's how you've got something real, and that you should prick up your ears and listen and seriously consider it or reject it, whatever works for you. But because you're not sufferance to anybody's definitions or anybody's anything. But if it rings true for you in that sense, and you start seeing, oh yeah, well, this guy said that, and they said this, and they said that, the other thing, but they're all kind of on the same page in terms of the functionality involved, then you've got something real. Okay, so look for that in my definitions. If you see some familiarity and a sense of familiarity in what I'm talking about, oh yeah, so and so said the same thing just in a different way, then there's something real here. Okay, and then you can decide what you want to do with it. Okay, so let's first just very quickly, and this won't be a long video, but let's just look at some of those base definitions that I would like you to get into place and understand conceptually, so that you know what the building blocks are that you're actually working with to build your book. Okay, so first we're going to look at the scene components definitions. Okay. It all starts, and you'll get this download as a digital download as part of the class. It'll be in the section. A story beat is a discrete story moment of character choice, character action, or effect that impels a scene forward at the scene sequence, and story structure milestone level. We're going to get into those last couple of things a little later. But I want to explain what discrete moment means. Okay, we're talking about literally a thing that happens, not a bunch of things, not a crazy laundry list of all these actions and crazy, no, a thing. That's either a character making a choice or a character taking an action, or an effect. An effect is the consequence. of a choice or an action. And that effect helps to move things forward, but it is an instance of. It is not, again, a laundry list of things and of consequential events. No, it's a thing, a moment in story time. How long is a moment? It's a moment. And that operates at the scene sequence, and story structure milestone levels. We'll talk, again, we're going to talk all, but that's what a story beat is. A very discrete story moment. That's a combination, that's usually one of those three things. Now you're going to find other beat definitions that are much more abstract, much more obtuse, much more, Robert McKee's, for instance, is much more 80,000 foot level. Okay, this is a little, again, this is more structural. This is like, my approach is structural. So this is more of a structural definition of a beat, and not an abstract conceptual idea so much. This is how structurally beats work in my world. Okay. Now you have to understand that in order to do the rest of these definitions, because they all build off of a beat. But now let's define a little bit here what a scene actually is. Okay. It's a linked sequence of story beats. So you've got more than one beat linked together dramatically or comedically, taking place across a single location in that discrete story moment, in story time, whatever time that is, organized around some point of conflict, fueled by some oppositional resistance force, and told through a consistent point of view character working toward a goal that incrementally raises story stakes. Let me just interject something here about stakes, because I've used stakes in multiple spots in the course. I just want to make sure you understand what a story stake is. A story stake is made up of three things. Something is going to be won, something is going to be lost, either emotional, tangible, or both. There is a consequence, story plot consequence, to the winning or the losing. And the key is, all the consequences become ever more consequential as you move through the story timeline. Forward, backwards, sideways, whatever timeline you're playing with. The consequences must always build to greater, higher stakes, meaning there's more to be won, more to be lost. The consequences are more consequential than the last ones that happened. That's how you build. That's what building stakes means. Okay? So that's what's happening here. You're incrementally raising story stakes as you go through this dramatically linked sequence of different beats that introduces along the way complications or reversals that either shift, escalate, or resolve a conflict, leading to the next scene. And we're going to see this a little later on when we look at our examples from Gatsby and Of Mice and Men. But that's what a scene is. Typically 3 beats linked together, could be 2, stuck in a place, in a time, around conflict that raises stakes, etc., etc. That's the context of the structure of how a scene is defined. On a more general level, Whenever you change point of view character, whenever you have a change of physical location, whenever you have a change in story time, even day for night, you're going into a new scene. Okay, so that's a very general rule of thumb. Time, location, point of view, character. Those three things. If any of those change, boom, separation, there's a scene change. You have a new scene. Story beats occur in a specific kind of progression. There's levels of story beats. And again, we're going to talk about scene, sequence, and milestone later. But these are the levels. You have the story beat itself. Beats build and create scenes. Scenes are linked together in sequences. We'll talk about sequences in a second. But all of those scene sequences are made up of beats, and all of those sequences then build toward story structure milestones, which we talked about in the classic story structure. All of those reduce down to story beats. You're just combining them in different ways for different structural functionality. You're trying to establish sequences that build to milestone story structure moments. Those are the three different levels of story beats: scene, sequence, and milestone. And then these levels themselves are also progressively linked. Beats lead to scenes, scenes lead to scene sequences, and scene sequences lead to structure milestones. See how it all fits together. You need all of them. You can't just write a book or anything that's just a beat and then a beat and then a beat. You give form to that fundamental particle. These are your standard model components in physics. You got the standard model of particle physics, right? All the different particles that make up the quarks and everything that make up matter. Well, those are the beats. And then they get into creating atoms, which are the scenes, and then the atoms create molecules, which are the milestones. They're building blocks all made up of the same fundamental material. Story beats. Okay. A scene sequence is three or more scenes, which are made up of beats, that establish significant story milestones and moving everything forward. It's not just a simple beat. It's not a simple scene. It's a sequence of them that take on narrative force and direction and consequence to the plot, moving the character through the story, and are the core framework of how narratives flow across chapters. So scene sequences are really important because the sequences move you from big beat. See, there's also the concept of beat at the story milestone level. That's where it gets a little confusing sometimes. It's the fundamental particle that holds everything together, but people often refer to like the midpoint beat. What's that beat? What's the beat? What's the beat of the doom moment, right? Those are macro level story beats that everybody kind of understands and intuitively gets. But beat at the story level is a much more fundamental piece of those building blocks. But you can also refer to beat at the macro level, which is the story structure beats themselves. So I'll even do that from time to time and use the term beat talking about these milestones because it's sort of a term to art in the script writing world anyway, where I come from. Okay, so that's what scene sequences are. And then story milestones are what we've talked about already in other places when we discuss the classic story structure. And all the connective tissue that goes between those big story milestones. You got the inciting incident, you got your midpoint, and then you have all the stuff that's got to go on between those two big macro level story beats, made up of sequences and beats themselves. That's the narrative connective tissue that provides you what I call the story math, that makes everything logically make sense from this point to this point, all cause and effect. We see how you get from here to here using all these different building blocks and sequences of things that you're artfully pulling together and creating to establish that narrative flow from big beat to big beat to big beat, etc. Okay, so you see how all these pieces fit together to create the foundation for what you're trying to create overall in terms of the narrative. So those are the building blocks. Now let's look at the nuts and the bolts of scenes themselves. Okay. This is a document also that you're going to get, which is how scenes are constructed, with some examples from some stories you may know. But there's a general introduction here that talks about this process and what's being used, Hunger Games and so on. But it starts off with the basic structure of a scene. All scenes basically follow this structure. And again, I didn't come up with this. This is just best practice that's out there in the creative writing universe that is more or less generally accepted and understood to be true. Okay. The approach I've got, again, is more structural. So it's a little more practical from a hands-on delivery standpoint of you trying to create something. But you're going to see when we get into chapter scenes themselves in the next module, you're going to see how these ideas all play out. All these component elements we're going to talk about right now will be there, more or less. And it gives you a roadmap that you don't have to cross your fingers and toes hoping you're going to hit it and make the scene work. This is how you make a scene work. First, you start off with the setup. Where are we? What's happening? Who's present? Who's in the scene? Just know what you're dealing with. Includes a bit of description, the mood, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here's an example. It was just past midnight when Alice slipped into the darkened library. Okay, we've got a beat that sets the mood. This isn't a fun, happy story off the cuff, right? It's midnight, so it's mysterious. Darkened library, so it's ominous. So we know this isn't a slapstick comedy. So the mood and the tone is pretty clear. And we know what's going on. She slipped into the darkened library. Not on a banana peel. No, she slipped in clandestinely. That's what's going on here. So there's a ton of information in this simple little sentence that describes the setup. We know where we are, when we are. It's at nighttime or early morning. And we know who's involved. And we know what's going on. That is a beat. It's also a scene, or a piece of a scene. It's the setup portion of the scene. Okay? So we've established that. Then there's a goal. What does the point of view character in this scene, and every scene has a point of view character, 1, not 10, not 15, not 3, but 1. What do they want in the scene? Oh my God, characters have to want stuff all over the place. What are you talking about, Lyons? They got to want something on the story level. They got to want something on the chapter level. They got to want something on the scene level. Give me a break. Okay, don't do it. Problem solved. But your scenes and your chapters and your book are going to be flip-flopping all over the place if there's no clear direction toward a goal that gives a sense of momentum. That's what goals give the story, the chapter, the scene. It gives you a reason to keep going toward something. That's the function, the story function, the structural function of goal and desire in a narrative. It's got a purpose. Okay, and it has it all the way down to the scene level. So what is it? There's a worksheet that help you do this. Okay, so what is it? What does that POV character want in the scene? This gives scene direction and purpose. Okay, Alice just slipped into the library. Why? Because she's slippery? No. She wants to find the missing ledger before anyone notices she's there. That's her goal in the scene. This isn't the story goal. The ledger may represent something much bigger in terms of the overall story mystery. But there are these things called linking desires, which we'll talk about in some other worksheet. But in this one, this particular goal for this scene is very clear. She's trying to find something in particular. Okay? And then every scene has conflict. Oh, here we go again. You know, more conflict. The book level, the chapter level, the scene level. Yes. It's everywhere in everything. When you write a narrative, when you write a story, you must have conflict. There is a thing called Kisho Tengetsu, Japanese form of storytelling, Korean storytelling, used in Asia. It's supposedly called the conflictless story structure methodology. It's told in four acts or 4 sections. And it's very different than what you're learning in the Western form of storytelling with, you know, all these all these milestone beats we talk about. But I submit that if you're familiar with Kisho, is that there's a ton of conflict in it, built in. Because conflict is part of human nature and part of human interaction and dramatic storytelling, even in what people claim to be a conflictless storytelling methodology, which is Kisho. So it's worth looking at and investigating and doing some research on your own. But conflict is everywhere in everything all of the time. Okay, so what's the conflict in the scene? Someone or something gets in the way, either a person, a discovery, or some complication gets in the way. This adds tension that drives the story forward. The character wants the ledger. Okay, well, what's going to happen? She hears footsteps. Someone else is in the library searching for the same thing. Now we've got conflict and mystery. Who is it? Will they discover her? Let's find out, right? That's the next question. Then there's a midpoint scene complication. Okay? Just like at the chapter level, just like at the story level, there's a midpoint complication that raises the stakes in the scene. It's a peak moment of tension or a major reveal. That's the no going back moment in the scene. Again, it's not going to be earth-shattering. Well, maybe it is. Maybe it will be earth-shattering, but odds are it's going to be incrementally important in terms of creating more tension in the overall chapter you're in. But it is a peak tension in the scene itself, where something changes or a decision is made, and dramatic stakes are incrementally increased. As an example, she realizes that this person is her nasty brother, sneaking around, and he might expose her, ruining her quest. Not her quest, her quest. There's the conflict. There's the complication that, oh my gosh, it's her brother who doesn't like her. And there we go. That's the peak tension. That's the key revelation. And how does it resolve? All these things even at the scene level, there's got to be some resolution. There's got to be some denouement. What happens as a result of this revelation? Characters can reflect, come up with a new plan, change course. There's a million things you can make your character do. But it often ends at the end of the scene with a new question, a choice or decision that has to be made, some concrete action, or some shift in the momentum of the scene that moves you into the next scene. Okay. So in this case, the example would be Alice decides to team up with her brother. Talk about a reversal. A reversal is just an expectation that you're setting in the story that you reverse. The bad guy ends up being a good guy. The gun that's loaded with the laser bullets is actually, got, blanks. Something you set an expectation and you reverse that expectation. Even though he betrayed her in the past, she's going to team up with him. And that's how you get out of the scene. That's interesting. That's dramatically compelling. Okay? So these 5 elements are in a scene. Every scene, can you miss some of these pieces? Yes. People do all the time. But as long as you know what they are, when you are missing one, don't let it stop you. Just keep going. You'll end up going back perhaps and then filling in the gap, or just keep going. No harm, no foul. Probably. But at least you've got a structure to work with that points your nose. All right, let's look at some examples here. Oh, bonus tips. Yeah. Good scenes often start late and leave early, just like short stories. Get to the meat quickly. Internal thoughts and emotions add depth, but use sparingly. Not every scene has to be high action, but every scene has to move things forward in some way, dramatically. Moving forward means adding tension, anticipation, expectation, dramatic irony, which I talk about in the pacing ebook, commercial pace, RSD ebook number 1. Those are things you're kind of going for here. Okay, so let's look at an example from the Hunger Games. Okay, the setup. Okay, first piece. We're in District 12, and there's a major event undergoing. That's unfolding in the town square, where they're going to choose a boy and a girl for the Hunger Games. That's the setup for the scene. It's tense, public, emotionally charged. And then there's, Prim, the strangled cry comes out from my throat. It's a first-person narrative. And we see her reaction, Katniss's reaction. What's the goal? Her goal in the scene is going to be to protect her sister. She wants to stop Prim from being taken. I volunteer. I volunteer as tribute. Right? There we go. What's the conflict? The Capitol's rules and the ceremony are cold and rigid. No one expects this. They're in shock. Expectations are subverted. There's a danger in moving forward. Takes a few moments to register it, but once it's done, the effect is electric. Right? This is a clear us against them moment. And we know who the opposition is. The representative of the Capitol. The one with the weird hair and the makeup and all that. What's the midpoint complication? Well, in the scene, Katniss accepts the tribute. She becomes the female pick. That's the complication. There's no going back now. This is it. And how does she resolve it? She's in shock. There's no real resolution from the standpoint of, I'm committed. That's how it resolves. She loses this battle. The emotional state, she's done her job of saving her sister, but at the expense of herself, which wasn't really kind of what she probably wanted. But that's how this scene resolves. It's not always a happy ending. It can go very south. Perfectly fine. Okay. You see, that scene has all the pieces. Great Gatsby. At the very beginning of the book, when he first sees Gatsby, the setup: Nick's returned home from dinner with the Buchanans, and he sees Gatsby outside, alone at night. That's the setup. He's in West Egg, kind of ensconced in his place, and now he's been hearing all about this mysterious person, Jay Gatsby, Jay Gatsby, Jay Gatsby. And he sees Gatsby across the space. This is the Valley of Ashes, fantastic farm, where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and blah, blah, blah. And Gatsby's got his arms outstretched across the dark water in a curious way. Okay. What's the goal of the scene? Gatsby's goal, Great Gatsby's a little odd because even though the main character is Nick Carraway, he's the unreliable narrator telling the story of Jay Gatsby and Daisy and Tom and all the other people in the story. And he's living vicariously, so to speak, through their desires, their wishes. So he's a very passive protagonist. And I talk about this in the examples when I go through the chapter examples of the Gatsby book. I'm making comments at the ends of some of those chapters about the narrative choices Fitzgerald made about what kind of protagonist he's got. He's a very passive protagonist. He's not an active protagonist. But it still works because the characters and the setup and the situation is very emotionally charged, and it works. So the goal here isn't really Nick's. His goal is, Nick does have a goal. His goal is to try to relate to this strange figure that he thinks he's now got to get to know. So this is fueling his desire to meet Gatsby for sure. But Gatsby's the one who's reaching out for something. Okay, and his goal is, he's reaching out for Daisy. He's reaching out for this green light that he sees, right? And he's reaching off into this strange distance. So goal's a little amorphous from that standpoint, but there's a sense of a goal. Okay, so this is a great example of, you don't have to be literal. You can be a bit poetic sometimes with this stuff. If you just give the impression that there's a goal and a desire, that there's something out there somebody wants, it's enough to carry the scene. It's enough to carry the reader. So again, this, as cookie cutter as this feels sometimes, it's not. It's really not. You have a lot of creative leeway here, and this is a great example. Whose goal are we talking about? Well, Gatsby's more than Nick's, but Nick still has a goal. He wants to get close and meet and understand who this Gatsby guy is. Okay, so that's not a huge upfront thing. Nick doesn't say, I've got to go meet Jay Gatsby. No, that's not what this is about. He's foreshadowing the end of the story when Nick himself sees the green light as a metaphor for the death of the American dream. Okay, so this is I kind of like this. I like the ambiguity of this, but at the same time, it gives me a clear direction to go in. I know what's going on. I know what these characters are about or what they want. Enough to feel like I'm moving forward and not standing still or going backward. Okay. So that was an important explanation, I think, at least from my perspective. What's the conflict? Well, it's Gatsby's conflict. And Nick's conflict would be that he glanced seaward and could see nothing discerning except this green light out there. What the hell is that about? So that he's trying to understand Gatsby's desire. Why is he going after this thing? Gatsby's reaching for something that seems inaccessible and unattainable. And Nick's trying to understand, what is that about? What is that? Again, a foreshadow of what's to come. So there's the conflict. Again, not on the sleeve, not, I'm going to punch you in the mouth, Jay Gatsby. No. It's a more subdued, subtextual thing going on here. I like it a lot. Midpoint complication. The image of Gatsby reaching out, this is the emotional and symbolic peak of the scene, is when Gatsby reaches. That's the peak of the scene. That's an action that's taken. That's a beat. Boom, reaching for the unapproachable, the inaccessible. That's sort of the emotional peak for Nick, because that raises the big question mark. What is he doing? I want to understand this thing. Minute and far away, the green light that might have been the end of a dock. Maybe something else. We don't know. We'll never know. And neither will Nick. And it bugs him. Resolution. In this case, a lot of the resolutions of scenes and entire chapters are often Nick just reflecting on the mystery or the conundrum or the inaccessibility of people's emotions and how he's feeling. And, that's how Fitzgerald writes a lot of his resolution moments. But we're left with that sense of longing and foreshadowing about the green light. And again, it's a foreshadow of the future that's coming. Okay. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished. He'd vanished. He's gone. I was alone again in the unquiet darkness. Okay. So that's the resolution. He's left with the unquiet darkness. Again, not a big bang moment. It's a whimper of an ending of a scene. Nick's quest to understand is quelched. That's the whole point. And so is Gatsby's. He can't get what he wants. Okay, it's a symbol he'll never ever attain. In fact, it will be his ruin. Okay. So this scene from Gatsby is, as I say in the note here, a powerful example of subtext, symbolism, and character motivation. Both characters have motivation in this scene. And it shows how scenes don't have to be explosions and car chases. They can just have emotional depth and narrative purpose, and the power of foreshadowing, which as I said, was all about Nick's descent, right? So this is a document you're going to get as part of the class. But this whole section is just showing you how a scene is constructed. Scenes have structure just like chapters have structure, just like books have structure. Stories have structure. Everything is structure. Not to force your hand, not to tie your arms and legs behind your back to force you into the cookie cutter. No. If a story is a story, it has structure, whether you like it or not. It's there. Your job is to find it and leverage it to express your voice as a storyteller. It's not there to hamstring your creative process. It's there to actually open up your creative process. This is the argument I have with so many writers. Oh no, structure. No, plotting. It's killing my creative process. No. Just the opposite. Everyone who does this finds that as soon as they do it, new opportunities, new ideas all fall into place and start coming into their mind and their heart. But now they're all consistent with a structural integrity to them that helps them stop going off into the story floodplains. Just the opposite occurs. Your creativity opens up. It doesn't close down. Okay, that's why this development approach that I use with Storygeeks is so powerful in my opinion. Again, that and 50 cents will get you a dial tone, but number of payphones, probably not. Um, but that's the point. Okay, there you have it. Now that was a bit of an abrupt edit there at the end. Sorry about that. That's just my poor editing skills. But you have it. Now you have it. You have a good piece or a good group of pieces of the nuts and the bolts of what scene building is all about in a book and in a chapter in particular. So if you're interested in learning more about this, you can go to storygeeks.com to the store and look for Build Your Book course, and it will tell you all the different pieces that are left for you to discover in that class. And we go into a lot more detail and a lot more examples using Great Gatsby and using Of Mice and Men, and tons of illustrations about how to do this. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and there'll be more of these coming, so stay tuned.